Okay, welcome everybody to our Tuesday devotion.
Welcome. I'm so glad to be back with you again, Xelian. This is great.
Back.
And today we're going to be talking about stories and the power of story. Last week we met with Jake Krause with the challenge, and we missed having you with us. But a little insight is that he said that one of the key kind of ways that help him through dry periods in his spiritual life or like dry spells of prayer is remembrance. And a huge part of that remembrance is story.
Stories.
Yeah.
Which is what gets into today. I was thinking titling, Love is a Battlefield and Stories Are Our Shield. Just this idea of how we're built for stories. And this Imago Dei again, and this image of God, how often Jesus speaks in these wonderful parables because people are made to understand stories. And one thing in specific that I've been thinking about a lot recently, just in the power of stories in people, is how it gives us the ability to empathize with somebody else's story, but it almost gives us this unique ability to see ourselves from a different perspective, from the outside, that almost brings us closer to ourselves. Like often I find when I'm so focused about everything going on in my own life, I become so unraveled in it that I struggle to step outside of it and actually see what's going on. And so stories often have been a very powerful way, whether in the Bible or just a story from a friend or somewhere else, of being able to almost understand my life better by not focusing on it for once, which is kind of ironic in a sense.
Yeah, there's this ministry at our church, or it's not there now, but it used to be called Story Guild, and they would get all the children to act out Bible stories, and the catch line of their ministry was where our story and God's story meet. I think that's a very powerful place where our story connects with God's story. Yeah. And I love how so much of Scripture is written in story form.
Yeah.
We get caught up in these stories. We teach them to little children they are far beyond, I think, what little children might typically be exposed to. And yet we read them and we teach them in Sunday school.
Yeah.
The stories, the way they catch us and enliven our imaginations.
Yeah.
So where do you see the power of story, Xelian, in your life? Where have you seen the power of story for you?
Yeah, honestly, I've realized that the biggest part for me, and this is what really gets me excited about thinking about what this looks like on campus for Trinity students, on and off campus, but the little stories that I keep missing out on, because often I wait for big stories in my life. There needs to be something extraordinary, some miracle, something that I really want to tell people because it's going to shock them. It's so exciting. It is objectively such a wonderful thing. And all these little moments in my day where God shows up, all these wonderful little things where He speaks to me through Scripture, where I see it in somebody's smile, where I see it in the beauty of creation. All these things, I take them and I put them in my heart, but they don't end up on the forefront of my mind. They're not the stories that I end up telling other people. And so I think I've realized, for me, it's this continual daily recognition of all these little stories, these little wonderful experiences that God gives me. On a walk somewhere, when I see somebody, obviously I'm very good at embarrassing myself, so those stories, which are not bad to tell, of course, but instead of just going first to the little funny things of my day, to have those little things, what God is doing in my heart, what He's doing in my life, even through a funny story, how do I actually incorporate Him into the stories of my life, in the small things, I've seen lots of cool, crazy things in my life. It can be easy to go back to those stories and retell those because they shock people, because they're interesting.
Like the stories of entertainment.
The stories of entertainment, they're not bad. They're awesome stories.
Like the hero stories we love, or the embarrassing stories, or the latest trip we went on, or the vacation, or the humbling moment.
Yeah.
And they are great entertainment, conversation as entertainment. I think it's really good. But there is a deeper way of entering into story that transforms us.
Yeah.
And story that speaks to where we've experienced God in our lives.
Yeah.
And those stories, I think, though, can sometimes feel vulnerable to share. I don't know about you, Xelian, but I sometimes am not sure just how acceptable those stories are all the time. How do we launch into them?
Yeah.
So how would you suggest, how do you envision that on campus happening, where people begin to enter more deeply into sharing stories of their experience of God, or where their story and God's story connect?
Yeah. And I think in a sense it's just almost, without taking away the gravity, because that's what I want to talk about next, is just the influence of these stories, but at the same time making it more a casual thing, something that comes up more often, because it's not such a, you don't have to have it all figured out, because often I think we want to tell a story that we feel like we understand in and out. If there's any questions asked about it, then we know what to say, but to share our human experiences, those raw human experiences with each other. And honestly, I think we think much too hard about how to guide a conversation. If you really pay attention to human conversation, it's very funny how quickly you can jump from one thing to something that has absolutely nothing to do with it, and nobody realizes that there's been a massive gap that you've just jumped over, because everybody's brain is making jumps from one small connection to the next,
Yes.
And I think, in a lot of ways we're a lot more conscious of where God is in our lives day to day than we recognize, because it's things where we might just feel guilty about something. We're recognizing where he is not.
Yes.
Instead, and then but to shift that conversation to talking about where he was actually, where he was in that little moment, and I think that conversation just starts from you talking about it yourself, because it's not something even that you necessarily need to start by asking somebody else. I think an awesome practical thing to do, and I would challenge you all to this, is instead of, because we know intentionally to love other people, we want to ask them how they're doing. We want to get to their hearts to see how they're doing mentally, emotionally, but asking them what's worth celebrating in your life, what is that? Because that's a way to bring in about that casual, lighthearted side of it. That's obviously God is everything good, so you can't get to any good part of your life without coming to him. And I think all of a sudden, then all of a sudden there's a long list of things that pop up from today that otherwise we are not naturally grateful for. And so, I think that's definitely a huge part of those conversations. And like you're saying, we could even go back to just even other old stories, like you were talking earlier about the story of the Samaritan. Do you want to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I was struck by, as we were talking about story, that Jesus talks in stories so often.
Yeah.
Right? His parables. And this past week, after you and I had kind of talked about what God was stirring in our hearts, as I was praying about it, this story of the Good Samaritan was really on my heart. And I was struck by how, even at the global level now, we are seeing, not even now, it's been around forever, right?
Yeah.
is war and conflict, is racism, is Christians living in different countries that are either at war or threatening to go to war, or at least in political conflict or turmoil, even within the same country. Is this new? It's not new, but we're seeing it now. And I've just become so aware of how it's important to be a force of God's love and a force of Christ's light, remembering that we are all part of one kingdom, which is Christ's kingdom. And the story of the Good Samaritan is the story that kind of came into my kind of wonderings about the struggle that we as Christians do face as we have friends in countries that may be in disagreement, or we have friends in the same country of different cultures and different races, and how do we love one another well? And I was struck by, in the story of the Good Samaritan, so in the story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus tells the story of a man who is on his way to Jerusalem, I believe, and on his way he got attacked and mugged, and they stole all his money and left to die. Not a good trip. Not the way you want your walk from here, Langley, to go. But so he's left on the side of the road to die, and a priest comes by and is on his way to his priestly duties, I imagine, and he leaves the man there. And then a Levite comes by, and he also is on his way. And the Levites were those people who stood in the temple and offered the sacrifices. So we have two people that are really known for the way they love and follow God. And do so, have dedicated their lives to God, really. And yet they pass this man by. And then a Samaritan comes by, and the Samaritan was the person who was from the wrong race or the wrong nation in this story.
Yeah, he is not obligated by culture at all to help this man.
Not at all. And most likely he would have some sort of animosity toward this man and not be really thrilled to help him. And yet he puts aside his agenda. He puts aside where he is planning to go and what he's planning to do, even with his money, honestly, because we see him then pay for this man at the hotel.
Sacrificial love.
Yeah, and he takes this man, delivers him to a safe space, and pays for all his care. And then says if there's further care needed, like, he'll take care of that too. So he really goes above and beyond. And Jesus points out this man as the one who was truly loving his neighbor. So that story, I think, just shows us the power of story in reimagining how we love neighbor. So often it invites us to think beyond our agendas, beyond where we're heading, beyond what plans we have. And even if we think they're really good, or for God, like we might be on our way to ministry, or we might be in the midst of ministry, and we miss that there is ministry and a person to love right there before us, and we need to just stop and notice.
And that really connects really well with my sort of my challenge for just our world right now. In this season of COVID, we've become very consumed with trying to lament the losses of not being able to hug people anymore, of classes being online, of all these things, of so many people being stuck at home, and I'm not trying to undermine the lament or the grief that come with those things at all.
No, because that's very real.
They're real.
That is a lament that is happening at our time, and a grief and loss.
It is.
And the loneliness that comes with that.
And I think, but we've become so focused on having God remove those things from our lives before we move into a place where we feel like we can love somebody, where we feel equipped, where we feel prepared. And I think that story comes so well to that place of we're walking on our road now to being like, I want to be done this lament. I want to finish grieving. I want COVID to be over. I want to get through this. I want to get on the other side of this trail. I want to get where I'm going, and then I'll be at a place where I want to love people. Then I'll be at a place where I have stories to tell, of joy of the day. Then where I'll be able to make these changes and habits in my life, where instead of always talking about the difficulties of it, the celebrations of life, the stories of the good things, the little good things that God is doing every day.
Instead of waiting until all the external circumstances are all in order, we kind of think, once everything in my life is going all right, and I'm feeling better, then I'll be able to love better. Then I'll be able to respond more peaceably, or support or help so-and-so, or my friend in need. And yet...
And just seeing how simple love is, There is nothing that qualified this Samaritan particularly other than good health and a good attitude to help this guy. There was nothing more than that. And I think often we let go of even how powerful these little joy-filled stories of our day can be. It's crazy if you look back how many testimonies from people is from somebody saying something so simple about God, just one simple thing, one simple little story about something he did in their day yesterday, the week before, whatever it is, but just people seeing that is what is on the forefront of your mind. And that comes to the next point of my question of what is on the forefront of your mind. If the good things that God is doing, the glory of God, his providence in your life is not on the forefront of your mind, then are you at the forefront of this spiritual battle that's going on in life? If our minds, like, what have we equipped ourselves? What weapons are we fighting with? If we're in a literal battle, life or death, like, you are thinking about what the enemy is coming at you with. You are spending time to put on your armor, to train yourself, to go back out there. And your conversation with your fellow soldiers is less so about, often the casual things we're talking about, or even necessarily all of the losses, but what do you want to do? You want to bring hope in the stories of why are we fighting, And it brings in the gravity of the situation again, because this is even more than a life or death situation. This is the eternal soul of man that we're fighting for in this world,
And this is the power of light that the darkness cannot overcome.
Exactly.
Thinking of John 1, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. But that light shines in us. And how do we become people of the light, that we can shine forth light even in the darkness? And I think there is so often this temptation to give way to the darkness. And yet, Christ is already overcome. and we are living in the light. And how do we then bring that light while not at all having to avoid lament? I mean, we see this all throughout the Bible. Lament and light are still held together.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to pretend or just always talk about what's good.
Exactly.
But so often, the light shines in the very center and heart of the darkness.
Exactly.
And so it's as we share our stories of both light and dark, and the interweaving of the two, that we experience Christ so powerfully.
Yeah, because battles are full of suffering and pain and loss. These aren't things that are at all to be ignored, but accompanied instead, by the recognition of the light in them, of the light around them, you know?
Yes.
The things untouched by the darkness. I have 2 verses that I'd like to read. The first one is Matthew 5:16. It says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." I think often, again, we might even ignore those good stories if it seems prideful or it seems like we're trying to build up an image for ourselves. Forget about it. Like, the glory goes to God. You know, don't worry so much about, thinking that people are going to think that you're taking the credit for the good things that God is doing in your life, but let your life be saturated with every story of good things that God is doing in your life, and people will recognize, they will see God in you, God's glory in you, and it'll be so much less about you.
There's even Brené Brown speaks about how, Brené Brown, okay, and she says that we can be a force of calm in this world, that studies have shown that what we show on our faces is reflected on the people that look at us. Yeah. So as we're walking by on campus, if our face is calm or joyful, or we smile at someone, or we walk past someone in our neighborhood, or at the park, in Costco, in the, wherever we are, and they look downcast, they look heavy, just by smiling at them, just by actually showing them a reflection of love on our face, it can evoke a similar response from them. And I actually had this funny experience. I read that on Brené Brown. I walked down our sidewalk, smiled at this woman who was walking past me who looked she didn't look very happy. And I smiled at her and walked past and thought, well, that probably won't work. But I looked back and she was starting to smile.
Really?
Yeah, she was like a little ways away and her face was lighting up. And I thought, how fun is that? Just by smiling at someone.
Contagious joy.
Contagious joy. And that's the work of the Spirit. Christ at work in us.
Yeah.
And can be at work in this world, in the very midst and center of the darkness that threatens.
Yeah, and that's exactly why Isaiah 43:10 says, "You are my witness, declares the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me and understand that I am He." And what better way to be that witness that knows God, that knows His image, who He is. He is a God of love. He's a God of joy, and sharing that with people. It is so good to share in our sufferings, as we've been talking about over the last few weeks, but it is also so essential to share in this hope that we have. Just as Christ endured all things for the hope set out before Him, the hope set out for what was to come, He held that in that moment. And I don't know, I just think that's such a powerful image of, what is this battle in our life about the spiritual battle of eternal things? Because these little stories that God gives us, those are our weapons. Those are the stones in our sling, that we use against the enemy. And I like even that wording of a force of calm, because often we think that calm is just the absence of chaos, but instead that peace itself is a force against the chaos and against the darkness.
Yeah, that our weapons are not weapons of military might. They're weapons of peace and love and joy and goodness and kindness. That our weapons are the fruit of the Spirit. Yeah. And I think that those are the weapons we take up. Yeah. The weapons of love, joy, peace, kindness. How lovely to meet discourtezy or cruelty with kindness.
Yeah.
Right? But that is how we are light in the darkness.
Yeah.